The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, cutting through the silence of our bedroom like a knife. 15 years in forensic analysis had trained me to wake instantly, my mind already shifting into professional mode before my feet hit the floor. Beside me, Natalie stirred but didn't wake. She'd grown accustomed to these midnight calls over the years. "Brennan," I answered, keeping my voice low. "Victor, we need you at 447 Meridian Drive. Residential burglary, homeowners requesting full forensic workup for insurance." Detective Martinez's voice carried that familiar edge of someone who'd rather be sleeping. I glanced at the clock again. "What's the damage assessment?" "Homeowner claims about 50,000 in watches and jewelry, plus cash. Insurance company's already calling for full processing." "On my way." I dressed quietly in the dark, muscle memory guiding me through the routine. Khakis, polo shirt, forensic kit already packed and waiting by the door. The kit contained everything I might need. Fingerprint powder and brushes, evidence bags, measuring tape, camera with macro lens, UV light, various collection tools. After 15 years, I could inventory the contents by touch alone. Natalie mumbled something about being careful as I kissed her forehead goodbye, our usual ritual. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, and even in sleep she looked younger than her 39 years. We'd been married 8 years, together for 10, and these middle-of-the-night departures had become routine. "Love you," I whispered, but she was already drifting back to sleep. The drive through empty city streets took 20 minutes. I used the time to mentally prepare for what I might find. Residential burglaries in upscale neighborhoods usually followed predictable patterns: kicked-in doors, ransacked bedrooms, grab-and-run thefts focusing on easily portable valuables. But when homeowners specifically requested full forensic processing for insurance purposes, it often meant something more complex was involved. Meridian Drive sat in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, where houses started at $500,000 and climbed toward seven figures. Mature oak trees lined the street, their branches creating a canopy over perfectly manicured lawns. Even the streetlights were designer fixtures that probably cost more than most people's cars. I pulled up behind two patrol cars with their red and blue lights painting the darkness in alternating colors. The house at 447 was a sprawling ranch-style home with professional landscaping and a three-car garage. Warm light spilled from several windows, and I could see figures moving inside. Officer Rodriguez met me at the curb. "Victor, thanks for coming out." Homeowner discovered the break-in around 2:30, called it in immediately. He's pretty shaken up. "What's the preliminary assessment?" Point of entry appears to be the rear sliding glass door. Perpetrator gained access to a floor safe in the master bedroom, removed cash and jewelry. Also took what the homeowner describes as a valuable watch collection from the bedroom dresser. Any signs of struggle? Violence? None. Homeowner was alone, says his wife is out of town at a business conference. He was awakened by what he thought was a noise, came downstairs to investigate, found the back door open and his valuables missing. I nodded, making mental notes. Security system? Rodriguez consulted his notepad. Homeowner claims he forgot to activate it before bed. Says he's been working late all week and his routine was disrupted. That was the first red flag. In my experience, homeowners in neighborhoods like this were obsessive about their security systems. The kind of people who checked their door locks 3 times before bed didn't usually forget to arm expensive alarm systems. The homeowner met me at the front door, Derek Vaughn, appearing to be in his early 40s, wearing silk pajamas under an expensive-looking robe. Even at this hour, his hair looked professionally styled, and his handshake was firm and confident. Everything about him screamed successful businessman. "Thank God you're here," Derek said, his voice carrying just the right note of distressed homeowner. "This is just terrible." Absolutely terrible. I've never felt so violated. "Mr. Vaughn, I'm Victor Brennan, Senior Forensic Analyst with Metro PD. I understand you've had a break-in?" "Yes, yes." They came through the back sliding door, went straight upstairs to our bedroom, took everything valuable they could carry. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed practiced rather than natural. My entire watch collection, my wife's jewelry, cash from our safe, probably $50,000 worth of items. I pulled out my notebook and digital recorder. Mr. Vaughn, I need to ask some preliminary questions before we examine the scene. First, when did you last see these items? Yesterday evening. I took some cash from the safe around 6 o'clock to pay a contractor who was doing work on one of my businesses. The watches were in their usual place on my bedroom dresser. And your wife, she's not here tonight? Natalie's in Chicago for a conference. Hotel management certification. She works part-time at a medical clinic, but she's been trying to develop additional skills for advancement opportunities. Derek's explanation sounded rehearsed, like he'd been practicing it. She left Monday morning. Won't be back until Thursday. When did you last speak with her? Derek's eyes shifted slightly, looking past me rather than maintaining eye contact. Yesterday evening around 9 o'clock. She called from her hotel room to check in, tell me about her day. I made notes, already sensing the wrongness that 15 years of crime scenes had taught me to recognize. Derek's nervousness felt calculated rather than genuine. Not the violated anger of a real victim, but something more rehearsed and desperate. Let's examine the scene, I said. He led me through an immaculate living room that probably cost more to furnish than I made in a year. Leather sofas arranged around a glass coffee table, abstract paintings that might have been originals, built-in entertainment center with components I couldn't even identify. Everything was perfectly organized, not a magazine out of place or a dust particle visible. This is where they entered, Derek said, gesturing toward the back of the house. The sliding glass door stood slightly ajar, and Derek pointed dramatically at the lock mechanism. You can see where they jimmied it open, probably used a crowbar or something similar. I knelt beside the door, pulling out my flashlight and magnifying glass. The lock showed tool marks, but they were surprisingly clean and precise. Professional burglars typically left messier signatures, rushed scratches from crowbars or screwdrivers, often with damage to the door frame from leverage attempts. These marks looked almost surgical, as if someone had taken their time to avoid leaving unnecessary damage. Mr. Vaughn, I notice your security system panel shows it was disarmed. You mentioned forgetting to set it? His face flushed slightly, and he looked away. I've been working late all week, dealing with some business issues. My normal routine got completely disrupted. I came home exhausted last night, had a few drinks to unwind, and just forgot to set the system before bed. The explanation was plausible but felt rehearsed. In my experience, homeowners who could afford $50,000 watch collections didn't usually forget basic security measures, especially not in neighborhoods where break-ins made local news. I'll need to dust for prints on this door handle, I said, opening my kit. Of course, whatever you need. I just want these criminals caught and my property recovered. The fingerprint powder went on smooth and even, revealing clear ridge patterns on the metal handle within seconds. Beautiful, complete prints, the kind that made identification straightforward if the perpetrator was in the system. But experienced burglars typically wore gloves or wiped surfaces clean to avoid leaving such obvious evidence. These are excellent quality prints, I said, photographing them from multiple angles with my macro lens. Very clear ridge patterns, multiple contact points. Either our perpetrator was inexperienced or we got extremely lucky. Derek nodded enthusiastically, perhaps too enthusiastically. That's great news, right? You'll be able to identify them? We'll run them through AFIS, our automated fingerprint identification system, and see what comes up. If they're in the criminal database, we'll have a match within hours. I continued processing the scene methodically, photographing everything from multiple angles, collecting potential trace evidence, documenting the exact positions of furniture and objects. The footprints in the thick carpet were particularly clear. Size 11 sneaker treads, recent enough that the carpet fibers hadn't had time to spring back to their original positions. Derek hovered throughout the entire process, asking question after question. How long would the fingerprint analysis take? When could he file his insurance claim? Would I have a preliminary report ready by morning? When could he expect to get his property back? All reasonable questions from a concerned homeowner, but something about his eagerness bothered me. Real victims usually focused on catching the criminals and recovering their belongings. Derek seemed more interested in timelines and insurance procedures. Let's examine the upstairs area, I said. He led me up a curved staircase to the master bedroom, where a floor safe sat open beneath a section of carpet that had been carefully folded back. More clear fingerprints on the dial and handle, and Derek's explanation that he'd forgotten to lock it after taking out cash for business expenses felt like another rehearsed line. Mr. Vaughn, what exactly was taken from the safe? 8,000 in cash, mostly hundreds and fifties. I keep emergency money there for business expenses. Sometimes contractors prefer cash payments. He gestured toward an ornate jewelry box on the dresser. Also some of Natalie's better pieces. Her grandmother's diamond bracelet that's been in the family for 60 years, some anniversary earrings I bought her, a necklace she inherited from her mother, and the watch collection? From this dresser here. He indicated a built-in dresser unit with several empty compartments. I had 6 watches, 2 Rolexes, an Omega Speedmaster, a vintage Patek Philippe, a Tag Heuer, and a Breitling. All documented for insurance purposes, of course, with certificates of authenticity and recent appraisals. Of course they were. I photographed the safe, the dresser, and the bedroom from every angle, documenting the scene thoroughly. But something fundamental felt wrong about the entire setup. Real burglars ransacked bedrooms systematically. They pulled out drawers, dumped contents on floors, searched through closets looking for hidden valuables. They grabbed whatever looked expensive and portable, often taking items that had little actual value but appeared valuable to inexperienced thieves. This bedroom looked like someone had carefully selected specific items and left everything else perfectly organized. The perpetrator had known exactly what to take and where to find it. I noticed they didn't disturb your television, I said, gesturing toward a massive flat screen mounted on the wall. That's probably a $5,000 unit, Derek shrugged. Too big to carry, I suppose. They were probably in a hurry, wanted to grab small valuable items and get out quickly. But they'd had time to carefully open a floor safe and select specific pieces of jewelry from a collection. They'd known which watches were most valuable and ignored costume jewelry that might have looked expensive to casual thieves. What about your laptop computer? I noticed one sitting on the kitchen counter downstairs. They probably didn't think it was worth much. It's a few years old, nothing special, except that laptops were among the most commonly stolen items in residential burglaries. Even older models could be sold quickly for drug money or fenced through online marketplaces. I spent another hour processing the scene meticulously, collecting every piece of potential evidence I could find. Derek asked 3 more times about timelines for the insurance report, mentioning that he needed to get his claim started as soon as possible for business cash flow reasons. Mr. Vaughn, I'll need elimination prints from you and your wife for comparison purposes. Standard procedure to distinguish between your prints and potential perpetrator prints. Mine, certainly. But Natalie won't be back from Chicago until Thursday afternoon. We can wait for her return, or she can stop by the station when it's convenient. We need to eliminate all authorized persons who might have touched the surfaces we're processing. I'll have her come in Thursday evening. She'll want to cooperate in any way possible to catch these criminals. His phrasing struck me as odd. Most spouses would say, I'll ask her to come in, or she can probably stop by. Derek spoke with certainty about Natalie's schedule and willingness to cooperate, as if they'd already discussed the procedures. By 5 a.m., I'd finished processing and was packing my equipment. Derek walked me to the door, still playing the concerned victim perfectly, but my professional instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire scene. Thank you so much for being so thorough, he said, shaking my hand with both of his in an overly familiar gesture. I really appreciate the police department taking this seriously. Some of my business associates have had burglaries that barely got investigated. Just doing my job, Mr. Vaughn. We take all property crimes seriously, especially ones involving this level of financial loss. When do you think you might have preliminary results? I'm not trying to rush the process, but my insurance company will need official documentation to begin processing the claim. There it was again. The focus on insurance rather than catching criminals or recovering property. I should have fingerprint results later today. If we get hits in the database, we can move forward with identification and possible arrests. If not, we'll need to expand our investigation. Of course, of course. I just want to make sure we follow all the proper procedures. I drove home through empty streets as the sun began to rise, my mind cataloging everything that felt wrong about Derek Vaughn's crime scene. The clean break-in method, the convenient security system failure, the selective theft pattern that ignored easily portable valuables, Derek's excessive interest in insurance procedures and timelines, the pristine condition of the rest of the house. Most telling was Derek's behavior itself. 15 years of interviewing crime victims had taught me to recognize genuine distress. Real victims were angry, violated, eager to catch the perpetrators and recover their belongings. They asked about investigative procedures and timelines, but their primary focus was justice and recovery. Derek Vaughn seemed more interested in insurance claims than criminal investigations. He displayed the wrong kind of nervousness, not the righteous anger of a violated homeowner, but the calculated anxiety of someone worried about whether his story would hold up under scrutiny. This felt staged, professional, planned by someone who understood how crime scene investigations proceeded and what evidence needed to be present to satisfy insurance companies. But Derek didn't strike me as someone sophisticated enough to plan such an elaborate fraud alone, which meant either my instincts were completely wrong, or he'd had help from someone who understood forensic procedures well enough to make this look convincing. I pulled into my driveway as neighborhood lights began coming on, already planning my next steps. The fingerprints would tell me everything I needed to know. If this was insurance fraud, those prints would either belong to Derek himself or to whoever had helped him stage the scene. What I never expected was that they would belong to someone who had been sharing my bed for the past 8 years. Tuesday morning found me in the crime lab by 7:30 a.m., despite having gotten only 2.5 hours of sleep. Coffee and professional adrenaline would carry me through. They always did when a case felt this intriguing. The forensic lab occupied the entire third floor of the police headquarters building, a modern facility equipped with the latest analysis equipment. My workstation sat in the fingerprint analysis section, surrounded by computers, comparison microscopes, and chemical processing equipment. I began by uploading the clear ridge patterns from Derek's door handle and safe into AFIS, our automated fingerprint identification system. The computer would compare these prints against millions of records in the criminal database, looking for matches based on ridge characteristics, minutia points, and pattern classification. While the search ran, I processed Derek's elimination prints that patrol officers had taken at the scene. His prints matched exactly where they should, on surfaces throughout his house, including the safe dial and interior handle, various locations on the doorframe, and some areas of the exterior door handle. All expected and normal for a homeowner. But there was a second set of prints on that door handle. Clear, complete fingerprints from someone else entirely, with excellent ridge detail and multiple points for comparison. And a partial palm print on the safe's exterior surface that showed an interesting characteristic, a distinctive scar pattern that had permanently altered the normal ridge flow. AFIS completed its search and came back negative on the criminal database. Not particularly surprising if this was insurance fraud rather than a typical burglary. First-time offenders wouldn't have existing criminal records. But the quality of the prints suggested whoever left them hadn't been wearing gloves or trying to avoid detection. I stared at the palm print on my computer screen, enhancing the contrast and adjusting the lighting to bring out more detail. The scar ran diagonally across the palm, creating a distinctive interruption in the natural ridge patterns. Something about that scar pattern seemed familiar, like a half-remembered image from a dream. I rotated the print, studied it from different angles, tried to place where I might have seen that particular pattern before. The scar was old, well-healed, probably from a burn injury based on the way it had affected the surrounding tissue. Then recognition hit me like a physical blow to the chest. July 4th barbecue, 2 years ago. Our annual party in the backyard, 20 or 30 friends and neighbors gathered around the grill and picnic tables. Natalie had been taking a large casserole dish out of the oven when the ceramic handles, slick with condensation, had slipped from her grip. She'd instinctively reached out to catch the falling dish with her bare right hand, pressing her palm directly against the hot oven rack. I'd driven her to the urgent care clinic where they'd cleaned and treated the burn, warning that it would probably leave a permanent scar. The attending physician had explained that burns affecting the deep dermal layers often created permanent alterations in fingerprint ridge patterns. The scar had healed into a diagonal line across her right palm, a mark she'd become self-conscious about. She usually wore rings or positioned her hands carefully in photographs to minimize its visibility. The exact pattern I was looking at on my computer screen. My hands started trembling as I pulled up our home computer and accessed the DMV database. As her husband, I had legal access to Natalie's personal information for elimination purposes, and within minutes I had retrieved her fingerprints from her nursing license application. I placed the crime scene prints and Natalie's official fingerprints side by side on my monitor, using the comparison software to align ridge patterns and identify matching characteristics. Perfect match. Every ridge, every loop, every distinctive marker aligned exactly. The palm print with its characteristic diagonal scar was definitely from my wife's right hand. And those clear fingerprints on Derek's door handle belonged to Natalie. She was supposed to be in Chicago attending a hotel management conference. She'd left Monday morning with her overnight bag, kissing me goodbye at the front door and reminding me to remember to eat actual meals instead of surviving on coffee and vending machine snacks while she was gone. She'd called Monday night around 9 p.m. from her hotel room, describing the conference sessions and complaining about overpriced room service food. We'd talked for 15 minutes about normal married couple topics, my cases, her conference, plans for the weekend, whether we needed groceries when she returned. But her fingerprints were all over Derek Vaughn's crime scene, left there on Monday night while she was supposedly 300 miles away in Chicago. I sat back in my chair trying to process this information logically and professionally. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd stopped by Derek's house before leaving for Chicago, but that wouldn't explain why her prints were on his safe, or why Derek hadn't mentioned knowing her personally. Maybe she'd returned early from the conference without telling me. But why would she lie about her location? And why would she have been at Derek's house during a staged burglary? Or maybe my 15 years of experience reading crime scenes was exactly right, and Derek Vaughn's burglary had been carefully staged insurance fraud, planned and executed with my wife's assistance. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the Chicago Marriott downtown, where Natalie had said she was staying for the conference. "Good morning, Chicago Marriott. How may I help you?" "This is Detective Brennan with Metro Police Department. I need to verify that one of your guests checked in on Monday. Natalie Brennan. Brennan. "One moment, please, Detective." I could hear keyboard clicking as the clerk searched their system. "I'm sorry, Detective, but we have no record of a Natalie Brennan checking in on Monday." "Are you certain about the hotel?" "What about reservations?" "Perhaps she made a booking but didn't show up." "Let me check our reservation system." "No, sir, I don't show any reservations under that name for this week at all. Would you like me to check other dates?" "No, that's sufficient." "Thank you." I hung up and immediately called the conference organizers, the International Hotel Management Association, whose website Natalie had shown me when explaining why she needed to attend this particular event. IHMA. This is Jennifer. "Detective Brennan with Metro Police. I need to verify attendance at your Chicago conference this week for Natalie Brennan. Let me check our registration list. I'm sorry, Detective, but we don't have anyone by that name registered for this week's conference. Are you sure about the dates? What about walk-in registrations or last-minute additions? We don't accept walk-ins for this particular conference, and our registration closed 2 weeks ago. All attendees would have received confirmation packets in advance." I thanked her and hung up, my hands now trembling noticeably. I pulled up our joint credit card statements online, checking for any Chicago area charges over the past 2 days. Nothing. No hotel charges, no restaurant charges, no conference fees, no airline tickets, no rental car expenses. But there was a gas station charge from Monday afternoon, time-stamped at 3:47 p.m. The station was located 23 miles from Derek Vaughn's house, nowhere near any airport or highway that would lead toward Chicago. My wife had lied to me about where she was going. Her fingerprints were all over a staged crime scene, and I was sitting in my laboratory staring at evidence that my marriage was built on deceptions I'd never suspected. I needed more information before I could fully process what this meant. Professional training kicked in. Gather facts, analyze evidence, build cases based on data rather than emotional reactions. I ran Derek Vaughn through every database system available to law enforcement. Clean criminal record, but his business information told a more complex story. 3 fitness centers around the city under the business name Vaughn Fitness Solutions. But recent financial filings showed significant problems. The newest location, opened 8 months ago with considerable fanfare, was already behind on rent and equipment payments. The 2 older locations showed declining membership numbers and increasing operational costs. Multiple commercial loans were in default status, and creditors had begun filing liens against his business assets. Public records showed Derek had borrowed heavily to finance the expansion, taking out commercial loans, equipment financing deals, and even a second mortgage on his personal residence to fund the new gym. If his business failed, he would lose everything he owned. $50,000 in insurance money wouldn't solve all his financial problems, but it would buy him several months of breathing room to restructure debt, find new investors, or plan his exit strategy. A man facing bankruptcy would be highly motivated to commit insurance fraud, especially if he had access to someone who understood forensic procedures well enough to make the fraud look convincing. Someone like the wife of a senior forensic analyst who'd spent 15 years hearing detailed explanations of how criminals got caught and how investigations proceeded. I pulled Derek's phone records through legal channels, using my authorization as the investigating analyst. The call logs for the past 30 days made my stomach drop. 57 text messages between Derek's number and Natalie's cell phone. 43 phone calls, many lasting 30 minutes or longer. The communication pattern was intensive, frequent, and had been ongoing for months according to the expanded records. I cross-referenced the times and dates with my own memory of Natalie's schedule over the past month. Her Tuesday evening book club meetings aligned perfectly with lengthy phone calls to Derek. Her weekend medical conferences matched up with blocks of text message activity. Her Wednesday night yoga classes corresponded to more extended phone conversations. Every single explained absence from our house correlated with communication between Natalie and Derek Vaughn. My wife had been having an affair. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She'd been lying to me for months, possibly longer, about where she went and what she did during her time away from home. And now, she'd helped her lover commit federal insurance fraud, counting on me to process the crime scene quickly and provide the official documentation they needed to collect $50,000 from Derek's insurance company. They'd planned this carefully, studying forensic procedures through dinner table conversations where I'd discussed interesting cases and investigation techniques. Natalie had coached Derek on what evidence to leave and what to avoid, how to make the break-in look convincing, what story would satisfy insurance investigators. They thought I was so predictable, so focused on my work, so oblivious to what was happening in my own marriage, that I'd never question the evidence or look too closely at the details that didn't quite fit. They were wrong. But I was also trapped in an impossible situation. I couldn't investigate my own wife without compromising any potential prosecution. Defense attorneys would claim I'd fabricated evidence out of jealousy or revenge, and my personal involvement would taint the entire case. Any confession I obtained through direct confrontation would be inadmissible. Any evidence I gathered through personal access to Natalie's belongings or private information would be excluded. My knowledge of the affair would make me a witness rather than an objective investigator. I needed to remove myself from this case immediately, but in a way that ensured Derek and Natalie would still be caught and prosecuted. They'd committed serious federal crimes that carried mandatory prison sentences. I wasn't going to let them escape justice just because one of the criminals had been sharing my bed for 8 years. I picked up my phone and called Detective Ray Espinoza, a 15-year veteran with an excellent reputation for thoroughness and a particular hatred for insurance fraud. Ray had spent 3 years in financial crimes before transferring to general investigations, and he knew all the patterns, warning signs, and investigative techniques for complex fraud cases. Ray, it's Victor. I need to transfer a case to you. What's the problem? Residential burglary from last night, 447 Meridian Drive. High-value theft, insurance fraud potential, but I've discovered a conflict of interest that prevents me from continuing the investigation. What kind of conflict? I'd prepared for this question. The homeowner has business relationships with several people in my neighborhood. I want to ensure the investigation is handled with complete objectivity. No questions about impartiality or personal connections affecting the outcome. This was technically accurate. Derek did have some business relationship with a man who lived 4 blocks from my house. I'd seen them talking at a community event 6 months ago, discussing fitness equipment or gym management. That connection gave me legitimate grounds for claiming a potential conflict without revealing the actual reason I needed to step away. I can take it, Ray said immediately. What's your initial assessment? The scene felt wrong from the beginning. Too clean, too selective. Professional burglars don't usually jimmy locks that carefully or leave expensive electronics completely untouched while stealing only specific jewelry and watches. Staged? That would be my guess. The homeowner showed more interest in insurance claim procedures than in catching the perpetrators. His wife was conveniently out of town, and he conveniently forgot to set his security system. Financial motive? I ran preliminary background checks. Derek Vaughn owns 3 fitness centers, all struggling financially. Multiple loans in default, creditors filing liens, business heading toward bankruptcy. He needs money desperately. Insurance fraud? Almost certainly. But I want someone with fresh eyes and no potential conflicts to work the case from the beginning. This one needs to be absolutely bulletproof if it goes to prosecution. Send me everything you've got. I'll start fresh interviews this afternoon. Thanks, Ray. This case feels important. I spent the rest of Tuesday morning preparing a complete evidence file for Ray. Every photograph, every fingerprint, every piece of trace evidence, organized and documented according to department standards. I included my detailed notes about Derek's suspicious behavior and the inconsistencies in his story, but I didn't mention recognizing the fingerprints or having any personal knowledge of the case beyond what I'd observed at the scene. Ray would discover Natalie's involvement through his own investigation. When he ran the fingerprint comparison, he'd identify her as the source of the unknown prints. When he checked her alibi, he'd find the lies about Chicago. When he pulled Derek's phone records, he'd uncover the affair and the extensive communication pattern. The case would build itself through proper investigative channels, without any contamination from my personal knowledge or emotional involvement. Derek and Natalie would be arrested, charged, and prosecuted based on evidence developed independently by an experienced detective. By noon, I'd officially transferred the case and recused myself from any further involvement. Ray had the complete file and was already planning his investigative strategy. When this went to trial, there would be no questions about evidence tampering, personal vendettas, or compromised objectivity. I drove home for lunch, dreading what came next. I had to face Natalie, pretend everything was normal, and maintain that pretense while Ray's investigation played out over the next few days or weeks. I couldn't confront her directly without destroying the case, but I also couldn't act naturally knowing what I now knew about her lies and criminal activity. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Same furniture, same photographs on the walls, same lingering scent of the vanilla candle Natalie always burned in the morning. But everything had fundamentally changed for me in the space of a few hours. I made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at our backyard. The same view I'd looked at every day for 5 years. But now I was seeing it through the lens of betrayal and criminal conspiracy. How long had the affair been going on? When had it started? How had Derek and Natalie met in the first place? Was the insurance fraud Derek's idea, or had Natalie suggested it? Had she volunteered her knowledge of crime scene investigation, or had Derek specifically sought out someone with law enforcement connections? How many times had she lied to my face about where she was going and what she was doing? How many conferences and book club meetings and yoga classes had actually been meetings with Derek Vaughn? Most painfully, how had I missed all the signs? 15 years of training in observation and analysis, and I'd been completely oblivious to criminal activity happening in my own home. My phone buzzed with a text message from Natalie. Conference session's running long today. Might be a late dinner. How's your day going? Love you. Even now, even while federal investigators would soon be building a case against her, she was continuing to lie. Probably texting me from Derek's bed, or from whatever location they were using for their meetings. I typed back, "Busy day at the lab. Working a complex case. See you when you get home." At least that was true. I finished my sandwich and returned to the lab, where Ray was already deep into his investigation of the Vaughn case. I could see him at his desk, studying crime scene photographs and making notes, probably planning his afternoon interview with Derek. "Victor," he called across the room, "thanks for the detailed file. You were right about this one. Everything about it feels wrong. Find something specific?" The footprint evidence is particularly interesting. Size 11 sneakers, clear tread pattern, but the prints only go from the door to the stairs and back to the door. Real burglars would have walked through the entire house, checking every room for valuables. What about the fingerprints? Processing them now. If they belong to someone with access to the house, we'll know within hours. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while my stomach clenched with anticipation and dread. Ray continued his analysis throughout the afternoon, requesting additional database searches, pulling financial records, checking Derek's business associations and personal background. By 4 p.m., he'd confirmed that Derek Vaughn was facing imminent bankruptcy and desperately needed cash to avoid losing everything he owned. At 4:30, Ray got Derek's phone records and discovered the extensive communication pattern with Natalie's number. Dozens of calls and texts over several months, concentrated during times when she was supposedly attending various professional development activities. At 5:15, Ray called the Chicago Marriott and confirmed that Natalie had never checked in or made reservations. At 5:45, Ray ran the unknown fingerprints through the elimination database and got a positive match for Natalie Brennan. Victor. Ray appeared at my workstation, holding a printout of the comparison results. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking as a friend, not as an investigator." "What is it?" "The fingerprints from the crime scene belong to Natalie Brennan. Same last name as you. Is there any relationship?" I looked up from my microscope, meeting his eyes directly. "She's my wife, Ray." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, concern, embarrassment, and something that might have been pity. "Jesus, Victor. How long have you known?" "Since this morning, when I identified her prints." "Why didn't you tell me when you transferred the case?" "Because I wanted you to work it clean, without any influence from my personal situation. This needed to be investigated properly by the book, with no possibility of evidence contamination or procedural challenges." Ray sat down heavily in the chair beside my desk. "God, Victor. I'm sorry, this must be... It's what it is, Ray. She committed federal crimes. You followed the evidence where it led. That's exactly how the system is supposed to work. What do you want me to do? Complete your investigation. Build the strongest case possible. Make sure they can't escape prosecution on technicalities or procedural errors." Ray studied my face carefully. "You're sure about this?" "Once I move forward with warrants and arrests, there's no going back. I'm sure. The evidence is already overwhelming. Derek's confession alone would be enough. But with the physical evidence, the financial motive, and the documented affair, this case is bulletproof." "Derek confessed?" 20 minutes ago. I confronted him with the phone records and your wife's fingerprints at the scene. He lasted exactly 12 minutes before admitting everything." Ray pulled out his notebook and flipped through several pages. He gave me details I hadn't even asked about. "They've been planning this for 3 months, studying crime scene procedures through conversations your wife had with you. She coached him on what evidence to leave and what to avoid. They practiced the timeline multiple times, rehearsed his victim story, even took photographs of the stolen items weeks ago for insurance documentation." "How long has the affair been going on?" "According to Derek, about 14 months. They met at his gym when she started working out there after her book club moved to Wednesday nights. Started as casual conversations, progressed to coffee meetings, then developed into a full relationship." I felt something twist in my stomach. Natalie had joined Derek's gym 15 months ago, claiming she needed more exercise and liked the convenient location. She'd been enthusiastic about her new workout routine, often staying late for advanced classes or personal training sessions. All lies. She'd been sleeping with Derek Vaughn for over a year, using gym membership as cover for their affair. What about the insurance fraud? Ray flipped to another page. Derek's idea initially, but Natalie refined the plan. She knew from your dinner conversations how forensic investigations worked, what evidence would be convincing, how to avoid common mistakes that get insurance fraudsters caught. She used my own professional knowledge against me. Derek kept text messages discussing the plan, even though she told him to delete everything. He saved them as insurance in case she tried to back out or blame everything on him. Ray pulled out his phone and scrolled through screenshots. These are devastating, Victor. Detailed discussions about when to stage the burglary, how to ensure you'd be the analyst processing the scene, what items to steal based on their insurance documentation. He showed me several messages, and reading them felt like physical blows. From Natalie. Victor works Tuesday night rotations this month. If we do it Monday night late, he'll definitely get the call. From Derek. Are you sure he won't suspect anything? From Natalie. After 15 years of marriage, he doesn't pay attention to anything that doesn't involve microscopes and fingerprint powder. He'll process the scene, write his report, and never question the details. From Derek. What if he recognizes your prints? From Natalie. He won't. Victor sees hundreds of crime scenes. He doesn't memorize every fingerprint pattern, and he'd never suspect his own wife of committing crimes. The messages continued for weeks, mapping out every detail of their plan. They'd researched my work schedule, studied my case files, even practiced their stories multiple times to make sure Derek could play the convincing victim. Most painful was a message from Natalie, sent 3 days before the burglary. Victor suspects nothing. 15 years together, and he still thinks I'm the innocent nurse who needs his protection. He's going to help us steal $50,000 and never realize what happened. There's more, Ray said gently. Derek admitted they weren't planning to stay local after collecting the insurance money. They had plans to relocate to Florida, where Derek was going to open a new fitness center using the insurance settlement as startup capital. They were going to disappear together. Derek claimed it was Natalie's idea, said she was tired of being married to someone who cared more about work than his wife, tired of living in what she called a boring house with a boring man who never paid attention to her needs. I stared at the text messages on Ray's phone, seeing my marriage dissected and dismissed in casual conversations between two people planning to destroy my life for money. What happens now? Federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence this afternoon. They're approving charges for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, wire fraud for using electronic communications, and mail fraud for the insurance claim paperwork. With the dollar amount involved, we're looking at federal mandatory minimums. How long? 5 to 7 years minimum for each of them, assuming no plea deals. Federal sentences don't offer parole, so they'd serve at least 85% of whatever time they get. Ray put his phone away and looked at me seriously. Victor, the FBI will execute arrest warrants tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know before it happens. At the house? Derek's already in custody. We arrested him an hour ago when he broke down completely and started giving us details about other criminal activities he was considering. Your wife will be arrested at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be there. Ray looked uncomfortable. You don't have to be. You could stay elsewhere tonight. Let us handle the arrest without you having to witness it. No, I want to be there when she realizes her plan fell apart. Are you sure that's wise? It's going to be traumatic, seeing someone you loved for 15 years arrested in your own home. I thought about the text messages, the casual dismissal of our marriage, the months of lies and deception, the federal crimes committed using knowledge I'd shared in innocent dinner conversations. She stopped being someone I loved the moment she decided to use our marriage as cover for criminal activity. I want her to understand that her assessment of my attention and intelligence was completely wrong. Ray nodded slowly. The FBI will be at your house at 6 a.m. sharp. 3 vehicles, full tactical team, standard federal arrest procedures. I'll be ready. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner as if nothing had changed. Natalie arrived at her usual time, complaining about traffic and discussing her day at the medical clinic. She seemed relaxed, even cheerful, probably believing their plan was proceeding perfectly. "How was the conference today?" I asked over dinner. "Really informative. Learned a lot about revenue optimization and customer retention strategies. Dry material, but useful for understanding business operations." She delivered the lie smoothly, naturally, as if she'd been practicing it all day. Which she probably had. "Learn anything that might help with your work at the clinic?" "Some organizational techniques that could improve patient flow. Nothing revolutionary, but every bit helps." We ate dinner discussing normal married couple topics. My day at the lab, her conference sessions, plans for the weekend, whether we needed to schedule any home maintenance projects. She asked no questions about my current cases, unusual for her, since she normally showed interest in my more complex investigations. The fact that she displayed zero curiosity about my work was another tell. Any innocent spouse would have asked about the burglary call that had gotten me up at 3 a.m. Natalie's complete lack of interest suggested she already knew everything she needed to know about that particular case. After dinner, she settled in to watch television while I went to my home office, ostensibly to catch up on paperwork. But instead of working on reports, I spent the evening making practical preparations for what was about to happen to my life. I called a locksmith and arranged to have the house locks changed the following afternoon. I contacted our bank and arranged to freeze our joint accounts pending legal proceedings. I found the business card of a divorce attorney a colleague had recommended years earlier and left a voicemail requesting a consultation. I also spent time researching federal sentencing guidelines for insurance fraud and conspiracy charges. With the dollar amounts involved and the extensive evidence of premeditation, both Derek and Natalie were likely facing significant prison time. Federal crimes involving more than $25,000 carried mandatory minimum sentences that couldn't be reduced through plea bargaining. Even with cooperation and first offender status, Natalie was looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison. At 10:30, she appeared in my office doorway wearing the silk nightgown I'd bought her for Christmas. "Coming to bed soon?" she asked, smiling the same smile that had once made me feel like the luckiest man alive. "Few more minutes. Need to finish this evidence report." She crossed the room and kissed the top of my head, our usual goodnight ritual. But when her hand brushed my shoulder in the familiar gesture of marital intimacy, all I could think about was those same hands opening Derek Vaughn's safe and handling stolen property. "Don't stay up too late," she said softly. "I won't." But I did stay up late, sitting in my office until nearly 2 a.m., listening to her move around our bedroom, brush her teeth, settle into bed. The same domestic sounds I'd heard thousands of times over 8 years of marriage, but now they felt like evidence of an elaborate deception. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Natalie slept peacefully beside me. Tomorrow morning, FBI agents would knock on our door with federal arrest warrants. She would be handcuffed, read her rights, and taken into custody for crimes that carried mandatory prison sentences. Her carefully planned new life with Derek Vaughn would evaporate in a matter of minutes, replaced by federal prosecution, public humiliation, professional destruction, and years in prison. I should have felt satisfaction, or justice, or closure. Instead, I just felt hollow. At 5:30 a.m., I got up quietly and made coffee, positioning myself at the kitchen window where I could see the street. At exactly 6 o'clock, 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled up to our house. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, surrounding the property according to standard arrest protocols. I opened the front door before they could knock. "Agent Morrison, FBI, we have a federal warrant for the arrest of Natalie Brennan. She's upstairs in the master bedroom. I'm Victor Brennan, her husband. Sir, please step outside while we execute the warrant." I walked onto the front porch and listened to heavy footsteps on the stairs, authoritative voices, and then Natalie's shocked scream as she woke up to find federal agents in our bedroom. "FBI, Natalie Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal insurance fraud." "What? What are you talking about? This is insane. There's been some kind of mistake." "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." Victor, help me. This is crazy. I haven't done anything wrong." I could hear the panic in her voice as the agents handcuffed her and began reading the Miranda warning. She was still protesting her innocence when they brought her down the stairs in her nightgown and robe, her hair disheveled, her face pale with shock and disbelief. When she saw me standing calmly on the front porch, her expression shifted from panic to confusion to dawning realization. "You knew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You bastard, you knew all along." "Yes, I knew." "How could you do this to me? I'm your wife. We took vows." "You committed federal crimes, Natalie." "Multiple felonies. Did you really think I was going to help you get away with it?" Her mask of innocence finally dropped completely. "We're married. I gave you the best years of my life. I stayed in this boring house with your boring routine, pretending to be happy. So you decided to commit crimes with your lover. Derek paid attention to me. He made me feel alive. You were never here, always working, never caring about what I needed or wanted. So you planned to steal $50,000 and disappear with him to Florida." Her face went white. "How do you—" "Derek told you that?" "Derek told the FBI everything. The affair, the planning, the text messages you thought you'd deleted. He gave up details about your entire scheme." The federal agents guided her toward their vehicle, but she kept turning back to stare at me with naked hatred. "I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed everything. Your own wife. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to sleep with Derek Vaughn and use our marriage as cover for criminal activity." "Victor, please. We can work this out. I'll pay the money back. I'll end things with Derek. Please don't let them take me." But it was too late for bargaining. The agents placed her in the back of their SUV and drove away, leaving me standing alone on my front porch in the early morning darkness. My neighbors would be waking up soon, wondering about the commotion. I'd have to decide what to tell them, how to explain that my wife of 8 years had been arrested for federal crimes. But first, I needed to get ready for work. I had other cases to process, other investigations to support. Life had to continue, even when everything personal had fallen apart. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal upheaval. Derek and Natalie were both charged with federal crimes and held without bond pending trial. The case attracted significant local news coverage, partly because of the elaborate nature of the fraud, and partly because one defendant was married to the police analyst who'd initially processed the crime scene. Ray handled the media inquiries professionally, emphasizing that the investigation had followed proper procedures and that all evidence had been developed independently. The fact that I'd recused myself and transferred the case to another detective protected the prosecution from any claims of personal bias or procedural misconduct. Derek's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but federal prosecutors were confident about their case and refused to offer significant reductions. The evidence was overwhelming. Physical evidence, electronic communications, financial records, and Derek's own confession created an airtight prosecution. Natalie's attorney pursued a different strategy, claiming she'd been manipulated by Derek and was essentially a victim of his criminal scheme. But the text messages told a different story, showing her active participation in planning and her detailed knowledge of forensic procedures. 3 weeks after the arrests, both defendants accepted plea agreements rather than face trial. Derek received 7 years in federal prison plus full restitution. Natalie received 4.5 years plus her share of the restitution payments. Federal sentencing meant they'd serve at least 85% of their sentences with no possibility of parole. Derek would be imprisoned until he was 52 years old. Natalie would be released when she was 44, assuming good behavior. Both lost their professional licenses permanently. Derek's fitness centers were seized and sold to satisfy creditor claims and restitution orders. Natalie's nursing license was revoked by the state board, and she was banned from working in healthcare or any position involving financial responsibility. I filed for divorce the same day as Natalie's arrest, citing irreconcilable differences and criminal behavior. Since our house had been inherited from my parents and remained separate property, the divorce was relatively straightforward. Natalie's attorney couldn't claim any stake in assets she'd never legally owned. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later while Natalie was still in federal custody awaiting sentencing. She received nothing except her personal belongings and her car, which was later repossessed when she couldn't make payments from prison. I changed the locks on the house, removed all traces of our marriage from the rooms we'd shared, and began the process of rebuilding a life I'd never expected to live alone. The hardest part wasn't the practical changes. New routines, cooking for one person, sleeping alone in a bed, meant for two. The hardest part was reconciling the woman I'd thought I'd married with the criminal who'd planned to destroy my career and disappear with stolen money. For 8 years, I'd believed I was married to a caring, honest woman who supported my work and shared my values. I'd trusted her completely, shared professional knowledge freely, and never questioned her explanations for time spent away from home. I'd been living with a stranger who'd been studying me, manipulating me, and planning to use my expertise to commit federal crimes. 6 months after the arrests, I received a letter from Natalie at the federal correctional facility in Texas where she was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but professional curiosity made me open it. The letter was 3 pages of self-pity and blame-shifting. She claimed Derek had pressured her into the scheme, that she'd never intended for things to go so far, that she'd been trapped in an unhappy marriage and had made poor decisions while emotionally vulnerable. She asked for forgiveness, suggested we could rebuild our relationship when she was released, claimed she still loved me despite everything that had happened. The letter showed no real understanding of what she'd done wrong, no genuine remorse for the federal crimes or the betrayal of our marriage. It was manipulation disguised as apology, another attempt to use our relationship for her benefit. I wrote one word on the envelope, "Return to sender," and mailed it back without reading it again. A year after the arrests, I received a promotion to lab director, partly based on my handling of the Vaughn case and the professional manner in which I'd managed the conflict of interest. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and recognition from department leadership. I used some of the additional income to renovate the house, removing the last physical reminders of my marriage and creating spaces that reflected my interests rather than compromises between two people. The master bedroom became a home office. The formal dining room became a workshop for photography, a hobby I'd neglected during my married years. 18 months after the arrests, I began dating Monica Rivera, a detective in our financial crimes unit. Monica understood the demands of law enforcement work, shared similar professional values, and had no patience for people who used relationships as cover for criminal activity. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared experiences rather than the intense attraction that had characterized my relationship with Natalie. Monica knew about my history, understood why I might be cautious about trust, and never pressed for more commitment than I was ready to give. 2 years after Natalie's arrest, Derek was released from federal prison after serving his full sentence. His wife had divorced him, taken custody of their children, and moved to another state. His business assets had been liquidated, his professional licenses revoked, and his credit destroyed by federal conviction. According to local news reports, Derek found work as a night security guard at a warehouse, living in a studio apartment and trying to rebuild some semblance of normal life. Federal conviction had made him essentially unemployable in any position involving responsibility or trust. 3 years after her arrest, Natalie was released from federal prison and entered a halfway house program in Texas. She'd lost everything: her marriage, her career, her financial security, her reputation in the community. Federal conviction meant she couldn't work in healthcare, education, finance, or any field requiring background checks or professional licensing. She found employment at a fast food restaurant working night shifts, living in subsidized housing and trying to rebuild her life from nothing. Her family had largely disowned her. Her immigrant parents were deeply ashamed of her criminal conviction, and her siblings had distanced themselves to protect their own reputations. Derek was still in prison, serving the longer sentence that reflected his role as the primary organizer of the fraud scheme. Their grand plan to escape to Florida with $50,000 in insurance money had lasted exactly 1 week from commission to arrest. 4 years after the arrests, I married Monica in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. We bought a new house together, creating shared spaces and shared memories that had no connection to my previous marriage or the crimes that had ended it. I never heard from Natalie again after returning her letter unread. Occasionally, I wondered what had become of her, whether she'd managed to build some kind of stable life after prison. But mostly, I focused on the future rather than the past. The case became a cautionary tale in law enforcement training, demonstrating how criminals sometimes attempt to use insider knowledge and personal relationships to commit sophisticated frauds. I occasionally lectured at the police academy about recognizing insurance fraud patterns and managing conflicts of interest in criminal investigations. Each time I told the story, I emphasized the importance of following evidence objectively, regardless of personal consequences. Justice required that investigators pursue truth wherever it led, even when that truth destroyed relationships and revealed painful realities about people they'd trusted. 5 years after Natalie's arrest, I was contacted by a reporter writing a book about white-collar crime and the psychology of people who commit financial fraud. He was particularly interested in cases where criminals had insider knowledge or personal connections to law enforcement. I declined to be interviewed but provided him with public records about the case: court documents, sentencing transcripts, and media coverage that was already available to anyone who wanted to research the story. The reporter eventually published his book with a chapter about the Vaughn case, describing it as an example of how criminals sometimes underestimate the dedication of law enforcement officers to their professional duties, even when pursuing those duties came at tremendous personal cost. The book noted that insurance fraud cases typically succeeded when criminals correctly assessed the competence and attention of investigating officers. Derek and Natalie's plan failed because they fundamentally misunderstood the character of the person they were trying to deceive. They thought I was an inattentive husband who could be easily manipulated. They discovered I was a dedicated investigator who would pursue justice regardless of personal consequences. 6 years after the arrests, on a Tuesday morning very similar to the one when my phone had rung at 2:47 a.m., I was processing a different crime scene when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Victor, this is Natalie. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been thinking about what happened between us. I'm working now, trying to make a life for myself. I know I made mistakes, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I still think about the good times we had together." I stared at the message for several minutes, remembering the woman who'd once shared my bed and planned to destroy my career. Then I deleted it without responding and blocked the number. Some betrayals were unforgivable. Some choices had permanent consequences. Some relationships couldn't be rebuilt after they'd been shattered by federal crimes and fundamental deceptions about character and values. I finished processing my crime scene, wrote my reports, and went home to Monica and the life we'd built together based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to justice. The past was finished. The future was what mattered now. 7 years after Natalie's arrest, I was testifying in a complex insurance fraud case when I noticed a familiar face in the courthouse hallway. Natalie was there for a parole check-in, looking older and thinner than I remembered, wearing a cheap uniform from whatever minimum wage job she'd managed to find. She saw me and started to approach, but a court security officer intercepted her, directing her toward the probation office. Our eyes met briefly across the hallway, and I saw something that might have been regret, or longing, or simple recognition of how completely her choices had destroyed the life she'd once had. Then the courtroom door closed between us, and I returned to my testimony about fingerprint analysis and crime scene reconstruction. Professional duties that had remained constant even as everything personal had changed. When I finished testifying an hour later, she was gone. I never saw her again. But I knew that wherever she was, whatever kind of life she was trying to build from the ruins of her federal conviction, she would always be the woman who'd committed crimes against me, lied to me for over a year, and planned to disappear with stolen money. Some facts couldn't be changed by time, distance, or regret. Some choices created permanent consequences that no amount of rehabilitation could completely undo. I drove home to Monica, to our house, to the life we'd built together on foundations of trust and mutual respect. The same professional dedication that had cost me my first marriage had become the cornerstone of my second one. Justice had been served. The criminals had been punished. The system had worked exactly as it was supposed to work. And I had learned that sometimes doing the right thing required sacrificing everything you thought you wanted in order to preserve everything you actually believed in. The phone would ring again someday at 2:47 a.m. with another case, Another crime scene. Another test of my commitment to truth and justice over personal comfort. When it did, I'd answer it immediately, just as I always had. Because that's what real investigators do.